Welcome back to Summer, and we are touring the Char B1 Beast. And we're going to do the interior course of crew position, starting off with the turret for the commander slash gunner slash loader. Part of the problem was that when the cash-strapped French army were rearming in the interwar period, they were also trying to upgrade some of their earlier tanks. And they had one-man turrets, such as the FT, which had a narrow turret ring. And it was a lot cheaper to simply design one basic turret design that was going to be used on everything. The B1 Beast introduced a new turret, the APX-4, which included a longer gun than the shorter one mounted on the earlier B1s. To get in and out, there was only the one large door on the back here, which you could also simply sit on when you weren't in combat. The original cupola was a domed contraption. It did rotate, but it had no hatch on the top. It's daft design, and so when the Germans captured them, and they pressed them into their own service, the first thing they did was replace the cupola with something a little bit more normal, with doors at the top that you can get in and out of the tank in the more traditional fashion. I also wouldn't read too much into the radio mount back here. Most of the pre-war French tanks went into battle without radios. Curiously, the turret was the most difficult part of the entire tank to create. It was harder to create the turret than the rest of the tank. So a number of tanks were sent in from the factories without turrets, basically as 75mm assault guns. Now, improved or not, getting in and out through this hatch is a serious problem. There's a couple of issues. Firstly, it's very long and elongated and not very wide. A bigger problem, however, is that there is no seat for the commander, and it's a long drop to the bottom. So you want to be getting in and out of this thing very carefully. And you can see it's quite a tight squeeze. Even pieces of my belt are getting caught. So I'm not even going to try the oh my god, the tank is on fire test through this hatch. Fortunately, there are doors elsewhere in the tank. Once one is down inside the one-man turret, well, it's not crowded, but until you realize how overworked you are. But what worries me more is the fact that since he's not sitting on a seat or anything, if the tank is being thrown around, he is being thrown around, and there's all sorts of things that he could bash his head against. Although I do know that there is some foam on the interior lining of the cupola ring. Traverse is either electric or manual. A full circle under electric is about 30 seconds. Well, not bad, especially given the time. To its front, the sight is mounted directly above the coaxial machine gun. Now, it has been disconnected right now by use of this plunger from the main gun, and because there's no weight of the gun to balance it, you'll see it's independent of elevation and about 10 degrees of traverse each way. I don't know why you do it, but it is an option. It was a common thing at the time. To the right, the 47, the breech guard will fold out of the way if you're using the hatch at the back, through which, of course, if you haven't figured it out, that's where the camera is right now. The gun is a muzzle velocity of about 650 to 700 meters a second out of the 34 caliber length gun. This will punch the armor-piercing round through about 4 centimeters of armor, sloped at 30 degrees at 400 meters. Not bad. About 50 rounds of 47 were carried in the tank, most of which were not in the turret. There's not really much else to say for the commander's position. If he was lucky, he had a sling that he might use to support his weight, but I really can't see why he would do it. That's it, so let's go down. If you come down from the turret and you look aft to the firewall, on the left-hand side of the firewall, you're going to see this multifaceted door here with a little viewport. And talking with the museum staff, the only reason we think this viewport exists is so that you can look to the rear and see whether or not your engine has caught fire, which doesn't strike me as being very reassuring. However, if you open it up, you will see the passageway. At the bottom of the passageway is the escape hatch. At the very end is that other hatch at the engine deck. You see also the steering gear, and to the right-hand side is the engine and radiator. The engine was originally an inline-six, putting out somewhere in the mid-200 horsepower. It was eventually replaced by a Renault V12, cranking out over 300. That was then connected to the 5-speed transmission. There are 4 fuel tanks in the tank, 2 100-litre tanks, and then on the right-hand side of the tank only is an additional 200. On the left-hand side instead is the radiator. Now, this particular tank, the interior has been modified. The big silver thing on the left-hand side is actually the current fuel tank, it looks like. So down somehow underneath the commander is going to be the radio operator, the 4th man in the crew. And as near as we can tell, this is a fuel tank was installed at some point when they turned this vehicle into a runner, so they didn't have to use the original fuel tanks at the back. But the radio, if it was mounted, well, in fairness on the Char B1s they usually were, would be on the left-hand side. Now the radio was originally a little Morse code only Yoki, ER53, range of about 15 kilometers, although later on it was upgraded to a voice-capable version. Outside of that, and if he was lucky he might have some sort of a cushion to sit on, his only other function, because he can't see anything, would be to hand ammunition up to the commander. Loader's position on the right-hand side behind the gun, and all I can say is God help the poor man. He has no seat, and of course the roof is just up here, so he has no headroom either. I have been kind of squatted down in this position for maybe 5 minutes, and my knees and legs are killing me. I can only assume that he was going to sit on the floor. Now, full disclosure, this is a false floor. It's about maybe 8-9 centimeters above the real floor, and this was added after the war as a sort of a protective system for the mechanicals underneath. But still, I guess to put things into perspective, this entire cabin is maybe 2 meters wide and 2 meters long, the driver excluded from this 2x2 square. The book says that there are 74 rounds of 75mm in here, together with 50 rounds of 47 and an additional 250 for the machine gun. And I am not seeing it. I have no idea where all this ammunition is supposed to go together with the crew. The gun. It is an ABS 1929 SA-37. It's all of 17 calibers long, does a whopping 200 meters a second. It is a literally low velocity gun. AP rounds did exist, but they weren't any more effective than the 47, but they did have a more useful anti-fortification role. The 7.5 is stowed by way of drum magazines, again, pretty much around the whole tank. And you can see it's similar to, let's say, if you've been to Afghanistan recently, the DP-28 we had occasionally come across. And that is it for this. The last position now is going to be the driver. So now I move forward to the driver's position. It was not actually very easy to get into because of this fixed back here. But once I'm here, it's actually not bad. Certainly I am still a little bit too tall to comfortably drive this vehicle, but I actually can drive it, unlike some others. The situation to my front is very familiar looking. You have a steering wheel, you got 3 pedals on the floor, you have a 5-speed gearbox plus reverse, no problem. When you steer with the steering wheel, you can see underneath there is a chain system. So it goes from the wheel to a rack to a chain to adjust the steering at the back. There is an alternate form of steering. It is these 2 handles here, which you would they work more or less as you'd expect. You pull right, and guess what? You'll turn right. But what you'll see is that these handles are both connected to the accelerator. So as I pull back, the accelerator goes down. This ensures that there is enough power going to the steering system to make it work. To see out, he does have a vision block to his front. The visor door will swing open and close. There is a small traversable periscope up here, has an arc, maybe about yay big. There's a small little vision slit on the left to give him some vision out on the left-hand side. And most importantly, because he is also the gunner, behind these covers here would be found the eyepieces for the stereoscopic sight, which would, by way of linkage, connect to the main gun, the 7.5 centimeter, which is manually elevated. And of course, there is no traverse, purely done by turning the whole vehicle. Just a note before we get out, the interior color, the yellow, apparently is standard pre-war. After the war they went to white, and today French vehicles are kind of a light green inside. So that's pretty much it for the crew compartment. Time to get out. There was an additional attempt to upgrade the B1. It was the B1 Ter. What this added was a little bit more frontal armor, new track and side armor, a bit of traverse for the 75mm gun, and a two-man turret, although the prototypes were only built with a one-man turret. The two prototypes were evacuated during the fall of France to North Africa. However, the ship upon which they were placed was sunk by the Luftwaffe just off the coast of France. She lies in relatively shallow coastal water, and there have been a couple of attempts to dive upon her and maybe even recover the two tanks. However, the conditions are very, very difficult, and I'm not aware of any successful attempts. All in all, about 369 of the vehicles were built, although keeping exact records is very difficult because, frankly, the factories were more interested in production than keeping track of what was going on. For a vehicle that had officially entered service a couple of years previously, however, its service record is a little bit checkered because too many of the vehicles were being delivered straight to the troops and then straight into battle, coming fresh from the factories. That meant that the troops didn't have enough time to train on them, to learn how to maintain them, or how to best utilize them. Indeed, so many were simply broken down and abandoned that the Germans captured and pressed into service 160 of them. Plus the Italians also kept a few. All in all, the vehicle could have done well had it been used in the role for which it was intended, but it really wasn't. The problem was that it was too specialized in function and the one-man turret was too limiting, so it never really achieved the potential that its thick hide implied that it could have. Hope you found the tour of the B1 BIS informative, and as ever, I'll see you on the next one. Although production began in 1936, the actual first battalion of 35 tanks was not stood up until 1935. No, 1938, because you can't go back in time. That would be silly. But with German rearmament going on, it was deemed advisable to quit mucking around trying to develop new... You're laughing! You're not helping me here!